Well, power to the people.
Fuck you.
Tolerance is a weird topic. It's this weird middle ground between overt bigotry and understanding. You're not directly oppressing anyone, so it's not like it's a really big deal, right? You're not impeding on anyone's right to live. You're not even remotely involving yourself. It's not my business, so how can you be part of the problem? This is how black issues are commonly viewed. It's how LGBT issues get the same treatment. And given the increasing amount of anti-Asian violence recently, well, you're getting the point. This folk solidarity, however, can often do more harm than good when discussing these issues. Let's talk about it. To frame this discussion the right way, or as right as I can frame it, I need to establish that while I'll be talking about the recent outbreak of attacks against Asian people, this isn't entirely what the video is about, and it's not my intention to take away from the community's ability to vocalize their experiences, and I've taken precautions to ensure that's not what I do. For those who don't know, there was recently a shooting of 6 Asian women in a massage parlor. Regardless of what the media and police try to tell you, this was a racially motivated attack.
Indicators that he has some issues, potentially sexual addiction.
Was this racially motivated?
As the chief indicated, it's still early, but the indicators right now are it may not be.
We just want everyone to know that this was not racially motivated. Everyone is welcome to come to Woodcrest.
The police have no incentive to tell you the truth. For lack of a better way to word it, by simply serving the state and being upholders of the current system, which perpetuates hatred towards Asian people, there's no incentive for them to communicate this stuff. Their job is to uphold the system and convince you that there's no correlation in the increasing amount of violence towards Asian people. There's none. Don't exist. Things don't happen in a vacuum. Violent attacks against marginalized groups, they don't really work that way. Let's start with the fact that there have been several reports about violent attacks for several months.
The metrics back it up. Alameda County's DA, that's out in the Bay Area where Oakland is located, where some of these attacks have been happening in their Chinatown. Over a 2-week span, they recorded 18 incidents of anti-Asian racist attacks.
These issues don't exist in a vacuum. The Stonewall riots are one of the most significant historical strides made in gay rights liberation in 1969. There were violent riots involving police brutality and raiding bars, specifically just to attack and harass them, just for existing. Stonewall was not a spontaneous outburst of desperation or vengeance by transgender versions of Rosa Parks, but like Rosa Parks' actions, theirs were actually an outcome of struggle and political literacy. Contrary to claims about the separatist nature of progressive political formations during the period, groups and activists of all types were in communication with one another about the unfolding and manifold requirements of liberation, a conversation that was inaugurated by anti-racist movements led by the Black Panthers and the Young Lords in particular. We can see the influence of anti-racist movements on gay liberation, not only in the assertion of anti-racist politics, but in the movement strategies as well. This is an example of a movement that didn't materialize out of nothing, but an ongoing struggle and conversation that culminated in a singular event, sparking a wider movement and rebellion. A very similar thing happened with BLM in June of 2020. There was already a conversation surrounding the pandemic and that it was disproportionately affecting black people. There was already a conversation about the growing freedoms of the police as a result. There were decades of conversations surrounding the defunding and abolition of the police. These things don't exist in a vacuum. There's been a collective effort to stigmatize Asian people, specifically the Chinese, even before the pandemic, and its presence served as the vehicle to perpetuate it. You had a president literally calling it the Chinese virus. And don't tell me that this is a minor thing, because it isn't. And while I explore language and the tolerance a bit more later, people genuinely believed this. I knew people would just get mad at you for ordering Chinese food or cross the road when they saw them just because they were so stigmatized early in that time period. And it's really ironic considering that China managed to deal with the problem of the pandemic much sooner than anybody else. It's really interesting, again. Another element of this is the financial and political incentive in stigmatizing China as a whole. This is a fairly common conversation now, but there's inevitably going to be a war between US and China. A war of power, dominance, imperialism, all the evils of capitalism. This isn't a new conversation, So when I see Biden coming out talking about how un-American it is, all while still in the same breath plotting against China, it's very difficult for me to take seriously.
My banks, your home, everything. You think I'm bad? Just wait till the Chinese take away all the freedoms you enjoy. freedom to complain, freedom to have as many offspring and assault rifles as you like.
We can go a step further and talk about the hypersexualization of Asian women. I spoke to a number of Asian women I knew about the situation, and something that was commonly communicated was a fear of sexual harassment. And while it isn't in my interest to dismiss what happened as merely sexual addiction, as the police try to do. The police try to do a lot of things, really interesting. This inherent objectification of Asian women, it really does go back a long way. For instance, the stereotype of Asian women being dragon ladies. It's a fairly common trope in media to present Asian women as promiscuous, cunning, sexual objects. In the Page Act of 1875, a limited amount of Chinese women were allowed to immigrate to the US, but it was primarily designed to control the Chinese American population, a big part of this Yellow Peril movement. It was quite generally thought that Chinese women would bring prostitution. In the earliest 20th century, most Chinese women in America were treated as prostitutes. Our sexuality is embedded in history. Our history is embedded in sexuality we see on screen. It is important to recall the historical context of sexuality that is inscribed in the immigration of Asian women to the United States. Figures of Chinese women prostitutes occupied a prominent space in popular culture to the extent that this imagined threat shaped immigration, resulting in the Page Law of 1870, which curbed the population. The process of racialization includes the sexuality of Asian women as a central subjugating force in ways that can be better reflected in our approaches to representation. I'd actually really recommend this book because it goes quite in detail and pertains to the hyperfixation on sexuality and the sexual appeal of Asian women. But the primary point I'm trying to communicate here is that there's so much propaganda and imagery and history dehumanizing the Asian community. As early as 1870, white Americans were already making this association, this assumption that Asian women were walking sex objects. In American society, Asian Americans are not seen and listened to. We are seen in specific ways at times as model minorities, as projections of white male fantasy, but we are not seen as full-fledged Americans. We are not seen as full human beings. It's a kind of erasure and dehumanization. There is so much covert and overt media and headlines just thrown in your face day after day after day about how evil China is, how it's us versus them. Like, how you really think about how surprising really is it that the public was drawn to violence? It's why we tolerate it even though we shouldn't. The general public, when not opposing the system at large, generally just perpetuates its values, and the language people use speaks directly to it.
But why? Don't you have enough money? No.
Language and how it's used is one of the biggest ways in which tolerance functions. The war on drugs, designed to target threats like black people and the political left. The war on terror, designed to justify war crimes and the pursuit of oil in the Middle East. The Chinese virus, thugs, insurgents, illegals. Anything but a family and children. Anything to dehumanize these people so you don't care.
That's why I love America. We some goddamn bullies. We don't give a shit. We be on CNN like, say our name, bitch. Say it 3 times. To see if we don't come over there and kill everybody. You don't believe we gangsters? Tell me what the Iraqi uniform look like.
I keep using that bit, but it's so good at illustrating just how successfully language can be used to stigmatize groups of people and making the public not care. Here's some backstory. I distinctly remember watching a WWE pay-per-view. John Cena just won like a steel cage. He got up, stood on the announcer table and said, "I have just received word that we have captured and compromised Osama bin Laden." And then he walked off stage with his stupid clown beat. At the time, I'm lost and confused. And then I wake up the next day and I found out what he meant. Oh, you mean you killed him? Why didn't you just say that? But they can't, because it makes them look like the bad guys. And the US and the control they have over the media, they are incredible at pushing a narrative that makes everybody else seem like the bad guy but them. You try it. Try criticizing the US or the UK support of the US to a sample size of 10 people. Guaranteed you're gonna have one person tell you. Okay, but what about China though? Interesting. Really interesting. Language in relation to tolerance specifically is really interesting. Both the tolerance to the language of others, but even the intolerance of those using it.
Remember we had the 2 gay guys? Huey was going to convince the 2 gay guys to not be gay.
Yeah. No, it wasn't. No, it wasn't that. It was the gay guys were really cool with everybody else's homophobia.
Okay.
And Huey was trying to incite them to be upset about it.
Even your beloved Boondocks is something that Aaron has gone on record several times talking about the responsibility for. The Boondocks was partially founded on the idea that hip-hop at the time had become irresponsible and disingenuous. I don't know what to tell you.
Even though it's just entertainment, does take on a greater importance, particularly in black communities. You know, a lot of white people are into hip-hop, but they don't actually see themselves on the screen. They are living sort of vicarious black male hero fantasies, and they grow up and they go to college and they get jobs and they grow out of it. But I'm much more concerned about young black kids who really see this as, well, that's me, and this is what, you know, my life plan holds.
They used the war on drugs specifically to target and stigmatize black people on the political left. They made it clear that they do it through their language, and evidently it worked given how many black people are locked up, how thoroughly blackness has been stigmatized and associated with criminality. But you think responsibility in your language doesn't matter. The government knows this. The media knows this. And so they won't tell you when they take life. Instead, they'll tell you, we just compromised some criminals. And you won't even care or process that information because it's been presented in such a way. I can call someone sensitive, or I can say they're passionate about an issue that pertains to them. I can say, oh man, they're calling them out for being transphobic. Or I can say, oh, cancel culture's on this case. Notice how the language that we use completely reframes the way we perceive these issues and situations. You have to be responsible, and there's nothing cool or intelligent about your apathy. Tolerance is conditioned, and it happens in very subtle ways. Huey P. Newton spoke about feminism and gay rights liberation in a very, very similar way. We should be careful about using those terms that might turn our friends off. These expletives should be deleted from our vocabulary. And especially, we should not attach names normally designed for homosexuals to men who are enemies of the people, such as Richard Nixon or John Mitchell. Homosexuals aren't enemies of the people. Now, I know punk was once used as a homophobic term for gay black people, so I'm going to leave that for the community themselves to decide and discuss. Because I'd be lying if I said I was adept in that term specifically. And the point I'm trying to communicate here is that the language that we use is important and informs not only the way that others perceive these issues, but also it's very telling how much we care about them. The abstract understanding of LGBT issues framed from the perspective of ambivalence and indifference is one framed from the perspective of, I'm not stopping them, I just don't agree with their lifestyle. This removal of responsibility, and by extension agency, is how many people have rationalized their apathy to issues pertaining to marginalized groups, their suffering, their lives. I have no control over that. Systemic defeatism is something I'll get into later, but the inherent divide between the desire to support and comfortability with the status quo is something that isn't a new or foreign concept.
Whenever it takes a stoppage of something that's going to affect the white man, you find the white liberal absent. But when it involves something that primarily will affect the best interests of black people, and black people only, then that white liberal is present.
The notion of not picking a side with these issues is deceitful, but what's even more deceitful is using a lack of control as a reason to justify one's ambivalence. However, this ambivalence can translate even across the spectrum of oppression.
And so I think it's important that I clarify my perspective on black homosexuality and lesbianism so that we're all crystal clear on where I stand. Yes, it is true, I do not support it. Yes, it is true, I do not condone it. But it is absolutely false if anyone says that Dr. Umar Johnson hates any of our brothers and sisters who practice a traditional lifestyle, a non-traditional form of marriage.
One of the ways that anti-racist, anti-imperialist, and anti-capitalist politics was suppressed and separated from gay liberation was by constructing those politics as necessarily homophobic. This isn't even a direct statement on how insecurities has helped frame homophobia, and it's not even a direct attack on the black community for being quote-unquote inherently more inclined to being discriminatory. As a matter of fact, it's this framing that sidesteps the issue from the people that really need to have conversations about internalized bigotry. White people. In the same breath, these issues of tolerance and ambivalence can translate across the spectrum of oppression. The mainstreaming of gay liberation attempted to turn queerness into an endorsement of state and capital, as satisfiers of queer needs, as incarnations of reason, and as reasons to make peace with the world that capitalism has helped bring about. Divorcing queer liberation from political struggles surrounding race, poverty, capitalism, and colonialism has helped conceal the historical and political complexity of queer liberation itself. Put simply, by mainstreaming queerness, making it conform to civic ideas of respectability, national belonging, and support for free market, gay rights and gay capital helped renew racial, ethnic, class, gender, and sexual exclusions. As it concocted marriage as the heart of gay politics, the single-issue turn helped produce a respectable gay as one of the ideals of the neoliberal capital, urbanization, and ideal embodied in whiteness. I've spoken more about the concept of whiteness in different videos, so I'm not really gonna repeat myself here. Instead, once again, this is where we see the separation of these issues being made present. If you can frame black masculinity and empowerment around misogyny and homophobia, that's what some people will produce. If you can frame gay rights liberation solely around gay marriage, who cares about racism? Who cares about violence against trans people? Who cares about the systems which produce homophobia? This tunnel vision scope on liberation, what are you willing to tolerate? I was in a conversation with someone who was tolerant of trans issues, and I distinctly remember them saying, "What's the point in a trans woman being a lesbian?" This is to imply that they still perceive women who are trans as their previously assigned sex. Yes, the intent is to be helpful, but how helpful are you being when you're communicating misinformation? This ambivalence to issues that don't concern us is very telling. And I'm not calling for some arbitrary intersectional generalization of how these issues are constructed, but instead for people to actually make an effort to show understanding and elevate the voices of these respective groups. Because apathy and tolerance have consistently been weaponized by those in power to divide and conquer. And it's inherently this division that serves to divide the political left and divide marginalized groups. And this isn't me saying it's entirely our fault, because to be blunt, it isn't. These are the systems in place, but it's a reminder that we should be mindful of how easy it is to conquer those suffering when we not only put them against each other, but homogenize their issues.
Here, the pinky finger is the key. And then you just hit. Ka-king! Bingo!
What are you talking about?
He who conquers the left side conquers the world, Chief. Setting the parameters. That's really the hard part.
Let's talk about hierarchy and how these issues are interwoven together. Identity politics is something that's commonly looked down on. Why? No idea. It's really dumb. I don't understand how one could be anti-identity politics when the world we live in and these identities in question have been politicized and therefore policed in attempts to control and subjugate these identities to oppression. The world we live in is racialized, it is gendered, it is sexualized. It's why the perspective of, oh, I don't see color. Like, no, that doesn't make any sense. There's no such thing as a single issue struggle, because we don't live single issue lives. There's always someone asking you to underline one piece of yourself. Whether it's black, woman, mother, dyke, teacher, etc. Because that's the piece they need to key into. They want to dismiss everything else. The issues that black women face aren't just black plus woman, they're black women's issues. It's why the hijacking of socio-political discourse by black men and white women is such a problem. Trans black men aren't just trans plus black plus men, they suffer trans black male issues. To compartmentalize these issues would be a shameless attempt at simplifying these complexities, and ultimately homogenizing these issues would be disrespectful. This understanding of intersectionality goes a long way in not adversely dismissing the issues of others. Patricia Hill Collins speaks about this, Bell Hooks speaks about this, even Huey P. Newton speaks about this to some capacity. Whatever your personal opinions and insecurities about homosexuality, we should unite with them in revolutionary fashion. We must gain security in ourselves and therefore have respect for the feelings of all oppressed people. We must not use the same racist attitudes that racist whites used against our people because they are black and poor. Many times the poorest white person is the most racist because he's afraid that he might lose something. This same kind of psychology is in operation when we view oppressed people and we are angry with them because of their particular kind of behavior or their particular kind of deviation from the established norm. This is really the sticking point for me. I promised I'd get back to this talking point earlier, but you know, I really want to hone in on it here. I'll engage in this conversation with people, and very often I encounter this brick wall response of, okay, but what are you gonna do about it? Alright, but we're in the situation. Now what? You talking about the issue, ain't gonna help. We've been talking for a long time now. What are you gonna do? This pisses me off, and it's really the main reason I made this video. Those that have been systematically battered and broken by the system, that have resigned themselves to the role of defending the status quo. You often get these comments too, it's like, what purpose is there in fighting a battle that seems endless, with no foreseeable conclusion in sight? Why talk? Why do anything? Let's talk about some people in history. Ottabattaguana was a black abolitionist. He was enslaved as a teenager, and he taught himself how to read and write, and used that skill to make arguments against slavery. At the risk of undermining a black abolitionist's legacy, if we were to simplify his actions outside the context of voting, all he did was write. He made an argument, a case for something, and because it was new and informed, he is perceived as one of the first black abolitionists. And he deserves it, because it was writings like his and arguments and discussions that he participated in which helped lead people to being educated and eventually leading to abolition, or to some capacity. And remember what we said about the Stonewall riots. These things, they aren't spontaneous, they don't exist in a vacuum. It'd be ridiculous to call them reactionary. You see this all the time in history, not just black people. There'll be diary books and letters and people will be going, yeah, this person called for the abolition of slavery. This person's writing spoke to the experience that people were going through at the time. And you have somehow convinced yourself that the things you say, the things you do, the experiences you have and how you engage with them has no impact on the world around you. We've already established that the government themselves knows the effect the media and language has on people. So why do you feel so defeated? Why don't you feel empowered? Your words, your language, your reality is your own. Speak out. I'm not gonna say that you're gonna live to see it either. You know, I don't really think I will. But wouldn't you rather be the one that said something? Like, even if you're a narcissist, don't you want your legacy to mean something? Look, Jeff Bezos dies and people will shit on him. I can't talk too much about Jay-Z and Kanye. Maybe another day. But you know, outside their capabilities as artists, I don't want to be, I don't want to be the one to tell you, but don't look at their money. They're gonna be buried with it. Look at MLK. You look at Malcolm X. You look at Fred Hampton. All these people, they weren't rich. They never were rich. Like, they never had a lot, but they lived for their people and spoke out. And what do you know? We still talk about them. Do what you can. And I must regurgitate that a significant number of black abolitionists, they just wrote. They just said something. They weren't tolerant. Swing the bat. Because I don't know about you, but I'd much rather be the guy that said something before shit hit the fan than the one who tolerated it up until it was too late.
Then hit the ball like you're defeating the enemy. Here, the pinky finger is the key. And then you just hit. Ka-king! Bingo!
Okay, this is Taylor. I'm not sure. Is it Taylor? There's no other way to pronounce Taylor, so I'm just gonna say this is Taylor. Taylor is primarily an illustrator and story artist. I really liked her character design concepts that I saw on her website, but even like she's done a lot of great advertising work, like brand logos and publications. One specifically that sticks out to me is a book that she was commissioned. You know, the art style works really well. I think it really does a lot to showcase her skills and capabilities drawing animals. And like that is a really big thing amongst all of her drawings. Like, she's really adept in drawing animals, and so the artwork looks really bubbly and fun. Like, I really enjoy it. One of my favorites is the Pikachu and Eevee joint. That's shit. I really like that. That one's really cute. I also really like this one. Like, being able to specialize in one area of design is one thing, but being consistent in your quality across the board is that is something else entirely. And even like, okay, even this establishing shot of the sun and the horizon, or the shot of the deer in the field. Like, I really like the coloring and expression. But you know, most of all, I think I really like the shapes. I like the shape of the island on the horizon. I like the shapes of Nagato and Hajime's heads and mouths here. And I don't even like Danganronpa 2. There's like a cuteness to the style that I really enjoy. I think they're making some really cool stuff, and I think you should follow them. I'm pretty sure they do logos and emotes for YouTubers too. So if you're interested in commissioning them, either check out the platforms that are going to be on the screen. It's Ethanol Howler on Twitter, or Celestial Tabriz on Instagram. Those are two different names. Check out their website, shoot them a commission. Again, the Pikachu one, that's what I'm saying. I'll recommend that one. I really like that one. I've been quietly a fan for a while, so I've been really meaning to do this for a minute. Yeah, so show her some support, drive some traffic her way, do what you need to do. We pray that tomorrow will be better than today. Power to the people. Peace.
Rosie, Rosie.